When we think of sustainable development, it's easy to think first and foremost around ESGs, so the environmental, social, etc. But it's also important to understand from our own organisation, what does sustainability mean for us in our context for our stakeholders. And when we think about sustainability, that could be down to financial sustainability, workplace sustainability in terms of human capital, and how these weave in as inputs to our strategic asset management plan. We can be considering climatic change as one of them, cultural values, and we may be diversifying out into different parts of the world, how that factors in, community engagement. How do we work in terms of sustainability, again, for the local workforce, but also the value that we may be able to provide back into the local community? And then, of course, ensuring the asset life cycle themselves support things like resilience, which can and will reduce those negative impacts, things like climatic change. It might be an event, bushfires, flooding, etc., a pandemic, whatever it might be. But sustainable development needs to be considered in all facets of an organisation. Sustainability over the years has sometimes received a little bit of a badge that it's a nice to have. We only do it for compliance. The world has moved on since the old triple bottom line, but very much sustainability. We need to be shifting mindsets. We need to do this through building awareness of what sustainability is and why it's core to building value for your organization. When people understand that sustainability is whatever we want it to be for our organization, it could even be down to the individual, to a particular function and class of asset, services, and of course the entire organization. But we've got to move past this giving lip service to ESGs and sustainability to actually building it into our day-to-day planning. Also, when we think of sustainability in any dimension, we need to face the very risk of short-term versus long-term, urgent versus important, or as we might say, short-termism getting in the way. This will depend on the type of organisation that you are in, whether it's government, not-for-profit, publicly listed, etc. But conflicting priorities can actually blur the lines of how sustainability is a force to be understood and to leverage. So ways around this, again, facilitating discussions and looking at trade-offs, looking at how it can reduce long-term cost and risk. And if we go back to an asset having actual and potential value, well, sustainability really links into the potential value because that's what lies ahead of us. An organisation that may have multiple locations does run the risk that the organisational culture doesn't value, see, or even understand the environmental and social responsibilities. If you're a large organisation, or any organisation for that matter, who is also trying to understand local Indigenous feelings or sentiment towards the organisation, cultural alignment is very important. So ways to navigate that, again, you could actually embed some of those sustainability values, maybe even as high up as your asset management policy, inputs to your strategic asset management plan, and building those asset management objectives around them. So policies and even performance frameworks, moving to lead indicators and using stakeholders, especially external stakeholders, to verify and validate that you are hitting the mark with the cultural alignment. When considering sustainable development and the goals and the strategies and around that, it's obviously important to understand who the stakeholders are that we're representing and how do we engage with them. So there is a real risk of failing to actually engage relevant communities. It might be regulators, Indigenous groups, and that can also lead to not just reputational hidden challenges, but also operational challenges. Sometimes when stakeholders really do feel that an organisation isn't working towards their needs, things can actually go wrong in terms of industrial action and even local sentiment, which can really derail an organisation. So the concept of co-designing strategies, bringing the community into the tent and understanding what they actually expect, what they need, and perhaps what they want, but also understanding some of the backgrounds, especially to Indigenous feeling and sentiment is really key. So again, demonstrating that inclusive decision making will help any organisation. It's one thing to adopt and seek to embed sustainability goals, ESGs, etc. But if we're only going to leave it to one person who happens to be heading up the environmental or the sustainability goals, well, the chances are might just miss the mark. We need to be able to understand, and people need to be able to understand individually how they can contribute to sustainable development. So we need to build those skills, and this doesn't need everyone to be or have a degree in sustainable development, but understanding what sustainability is in terms of that future perspective of an asset or a service is really key. So providing training on some of the sustainability tools, you could even look at things like climate adaptation, social impact, or even reach back into the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. Because if we factored those into all of the planning at the strategic, tactical, and the operational level, people will start to align and feel comfortable with sustainable development. It's one thing, of course, to understand and seek to embed sustainable development. But if we're doing it in isolation and it becomes theoretical, well, we're not going to get the benefit from it. So the real risk here is the sustainability initiatives are run in isolation, in silos, and separately from those asset management processes supporting whole of life thinking. Integrating the ESG metrics or the sustainability goals into your asset management planning, from that initial strategic asset management plan or equivalent, right through to the asset management plans, right through to the supporting functions in terms of operations, supply chain, engineering, etc. How we report on them, but also ideally demonstrating how we are investing in that sustainable development, and we can quantify and demonstrate that to stakeholders. From an ISO perspective, the most obvious connection points back to sustainable development are Section 4.1, understanding the organisation and its context. Well, that'd be an obvious one. Section 5.1, leadership and commitment. It's not just identifying ways in which we can adopt sustainability, it's commitment to do so, and that comes from really the leadership, top management, etc. Section 6.1, addressing both risk and opportunity in the context of sustainability. And then finally, 8.1, a direct correlation into how we do our operational planning and control, but also across the life cycle. When we say across the life cycle, I'm also meaning both the service life cycle and, of course, the assets that support services. So in summary, sustainable development in asset management means making choices today that protect value, people, processes, the organisation, and the environment for tomorrow. Back to the definition of an asset, it has actual or potential value to an organisation. Well, think of the potential value is as far into the future that you can see and you wish to actually plan toward.